Welcome back to Combat Mission Fortress Italy for the third mission in the foiling Fustian campaign. In the last mission, the British Airborne that had seized the vital Primasole bridge fell back under pressure and later evacuated their positions to the south of the bridge. This has left the immediate area in Axis hands, and the defence of the crossing itself has been taken over by Fallschirm Pioneer Battalion 1, which parachuted into Sicily last night. It's now morning, and the lead elements of the British 13th Corps are coming up the highway to attack. In this mission, it's our job to try and stop them. Unsurprisingly, the dominant terrain feature here is the Simito River. This cuts the map in half from left to right and constitutes a significant obstacle. It's only crossable by vehicle traffic over Primasole Bridge in the centre of the map. This is a long box girder bridge carrying Highway 114. The highway itself starts off in the right of the map and runs diagonally to the bridge in the centre before running directly to the German rear. Between the river and the highway then, we can pretty much cut the map into quarters. The most important quarter from our perspective here is going to be the far right. This is the direction the British are going to be attacking from. It's bounded by a deep canal to the left, which runs down to the centre of the map, and the Simito itself at the bottom. There's some light tree cover, but it's mostly open. The highway itself is on a slight embankment, so it's raised up and more exposed than the surrounding ground. The far left quarter is some more open farmland, broken up by low walls and a few shallower canals. On the German side of the river, the terrain is generally much closer. There's a more open area in the centre with some low shrubs and a farm complex, but either flank is dominated by orchards of varying thickness. To defend the area, we have Fallschirm Pioneer Battalion 1 in its entirety. One company is dug in the front left quarter, 2 company is dug in along the far riverbank on the right, and 3 company is set up on the close bank. Each company has a couple of HMGs and medium mortars, but the individual Pioneer squads have a bit less firepower than the standard Fallschirmjaeger. They only have a single LMG per squad. They do make up for this by carrying demolition charges, but if the enemy is close enough to be chucking those about, something has probably got a bit wrong. Backing the Pioneers up, we have a flak platoon. This is made up of the 4 flak 36s that were providing off-map support in the last mission. For this one, they're on the map firing in the direct role. These are 88mm guns. The heaviest British tank that's going to come down the road is likely to be a Sherman. We should have some overmatch there. The flak platoon also has a quad 20mm gun, the old flak feeling. That's something that can put an atrocious amount of fire out, but it's not going to do much against the British tanks. On top of these elements, a company of the Fallschirm MG battalion from the first mission will be arriving to assist in 20 minutes. 10 minutes ahead of them though, the MG battalion's 120mm heavy mortars will be coming online. So we have a pretty substantial battalion plus force here. The enemy is coming up the road with the Durham Light Infantry, so that's regular British Rifle Infantry and not the airborne troops we've been fighting so far. But they are part of a combined arms force, backed up by tanks from the 44th Royal Tank Regiment and supported by artillery. We've got a handful of objectives here. First, we need to deny both ends of Primasole Bridge to the enemy. Then we have 3 ground objectives, the 1 and 2 company command posts on the far side of the river, plus the farm on the near side. There are 1,000 victory points overall. Each of these ground objectives is worth a third of that. The battle is starting at 0800 and it's a misty morning, so visibility is going to be degraded even before the Brits drop the sky on us, but there are also only 35 minutes on the clock. That's not a long time to hold out, but it does mean I'll need to get my hits in. The enemy is already at a significant disadvantage because they're attacking into a right angle. They've only really got one option to secure the bridge, and that's to punch straight down the highway towards the 88, with Fallschirm Pioneers on either side. I'm not too worried about the British infantry in this context. With each Pioneer company having 11 machine guns and a couple of mortars, they should easily have the firepower to overmatch them, especially in this terrain. The problem is going to be the tanks and the artillery. There's not much I can do about the arty except mitigate by using the provided foxholes or keeping mobile. Of these two, movement is potentially actually the riskier option. 2 Company in particular, trapped up against the riverbank, has nowhere to go except back across the river. 1 Company is slightly better off in that they can use some walls and canals, but if artillery is falling on or around them already, they're probably just safer in their holes. The enemy armour is a different story. The only effective, reliable anti-tank weapons I have are the 88s. I only have 4 of them, they can't move, and they're not exactly easy to hide. So the key to this is going to be finding good positions for them, and making sure that they get their hits in. Ultimately, I set 1 up on each flank, and 2 along the road behind the farm, trying to find a good balance between fields of fire, concealment, and being not so obvious they're likely to get hit by artillery on turn 1. They're mostly focused on the closer end of the highway embankment, where there are 2 TRPs to help them get on target quickly. Those TRPs will also help me call in each company's mortars if they can't find anything to fire at directly, as well as the 120s when they become available. The basic plan then is to wait out the initial bombardment in the copious number of provided foxholes, then pop up and start engaging. Nothing overcomplicated, I just need to fend the Brits off for half an hour. This simplicity is partly to do with the force to space ratio of this battle. There just isn't really that much room to manoeuvre, or significant advantage in doing so as the defender. But it's also partly to do with the sheer volume of troops I'm commanding here. It's one thing being the battalion commander, it's another thing entirely being team leader for well over 100 subunits when everything is broken down. So for this battle, I am making a conscious decision to fight top down instead of bottom up. This is about the battalion effort, not the actions of individual squads and teams. As expected, the battle starts with the British unleashing their preparatory bombardment. With one important exception, this is mostly off target, and while it causes a handful of casualties, they're mostly incidental. The exception is my right-hand 88. There's a 25-pounder mission landing pretty much exactly where it was in the default deployment, and although I've moved it, I only moved it a little way towards the river, and the crew and ammo bearers start eating an unhealthy amount of shrapnel. There's not much I can do about that though. I'm more concerned about what's going to come up behind the huge smoke screen the Brits are putting up in front of their corner. The answer is a battalion of infantry with tank support. Opening up at the 10-minute mark, 2 Company starts to get its hits in. There's not much they can do against the Shermans, bar forcing them to button up, but the British rifle platoons caught out in the open are fair game. On the left, 1 Company likewise opens fire on the Brits heading their way, though here the enemy do at least have some cover and concealment from the farm and the wheat fields. It's still not a good day to be in the Durham Light Infantry, and it gets to be a worse day when I start bringing the Fallschirmjaeger's 81 mortars to bear. But for all that, it's hardly one-sided. The 88s are finding it conspicuously difficult to spot and engage the tanks, leaving them to blast away at the dug-in paratroopers. I've overestimated the ability of the Flak 36s to get in on the action from where I've sighted them. This is partially to do with the terrain. The Shermans are mostly in the lower ground between the highway and 2 Company, where they're hull down amidst an abundance of foliage, and partly to do with the profusion dust and smoke. The 2 central guns are the first to get a hit in, knocking out a Sherman beside the highway, and despite the rolling abuse it's been suffering, the right-hand 88 manages to score a kill before it's taken out by return fire. The left-hand gun, however, does absolutely nothing. Despite checking with the LOS tool in deployment, it just can't actually see. I suspect it's about a foot too low to actually engage over the riverbank, and because I can't move it, that makes it useless. That means the first Sherman to approach the bridge is actually engaged by the flak feeling. This is very satisfying and hopefully does a significant amount of subsystem damage that might blind it, but predictably fails to knock it out. 2 Company, meanwhile, is getting pretty beaten up by the tanks. The leftmost platoon in particular is having a hard time, but the British infantry are making no headway towards the riverbank. Similarly, the British effort across the fields towards 1 Company has gotten chewed up, and the infantry there now looks to be heading down the canal towards the bridge, chased by mortar fire. That leaves a 3rd British company and the tanks muscling in on the south end of the bridge, which is exactly why there's a TRP there. As they approach, the heavy mortars start falling, accompanied by 3 companies' 81s. The 120s are set to a harassing mission, and between them, they're putting in 4 rounds a minute. A steady barrage that lasts 15 minutes and relentlessly grinds down all the British infantry trying to reach the bridge. That's not a solution to the tanks, though. Once at the end of the bridge, they're masked from the central 88s by the farm and have a free run across. The first to make it receives a barrage of inaccurate grenade launcher fire from the pioneers in the farm objective. Luckily, one of these connects with the lower front plate and manages to partially penetrate. The Sherman pops smoke and reverses away, dropping out of sight down the embankment to the riverbank. Annoyingly, it's still in the objective area down there, so I'm going to have to sort it out. That's a job for pioneers and their demo charges. The first team I send in makes a hash of it. By the time they snuck under the bridge to get on the Sherman's flank, another one has crossed over, and although they get a grenade onto the first Sherman, which immobilizes it, they're both machine gunned. Unfortunately for the second Sherman, it experiences a pathfinding puzzle where one of the central 88s can just about see it. This ends fatally for the Sherman and blocks the bridge, but the first one is still down there. It's still in the objective area, and now that it's immobilized, it's staying there unless I can deal with it. It chews up another 2 anti-tank teams before the same 88 gets a bead on the turret and knocks it out. In the meantime, the enemy at the other end of the bridge is getting ground down by the mortars. The attacks on 1 and 2 companies have petered out, to be replaced by artillery fire that's taken over the mangling being distributed by the Shermans. Ultimately though, the AI has had enough and surrenders with 10 minutes to go. It's not difficult to understand why. They've lost about 500 men, and for all my disappointment with the 88s, 7 of their 9 tanks. On the other hand, I've lost about 200 Fallschirmjaeger, or about 30% of my force, plus one of the arguably valuable 88s. The vast majority of these losses were amongst 2 company, which spent pretty much the entire attack under the very effective guns of the Shermans. It's easy to see why the Germans started handing Panzerschrecks and Panzerfausts out to anyone and everyone after you fought some battles in Fortress Italy where the Germans don't have them. For my part, the majority of enemy losses were unsurprisingly inflicted by the mortars. That kill zone at the south end of the bridge is thick with British casualties, but it's worth pointing out that the machine guns of the pioneer companies did a lot of damage as well. The reality is that there are dozens of little incidents and stories down at the squad and team level here that I've simply missed. Interesting snapshots that have been lost in the scale of the battle. Fundamentally, this was a slugging match where I held more cards than the enemy. It was always going to be a struggle for the Brits. A human player might have been able to mount a more coherent attack, but the terrain was a significant factor, and there's not much that can be done about that. They did get their hits in though, and we'll see if this level of attrition is something my Fallschirmjäger can sustain throughout the campaign. Speaking of, we've fended off the first attack by 13th Corps, but it certainly won't be the last. Hope you all enjoyed this video and found it interesting. If you'd like to see these early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships, whether you do or not. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.